up?
Well, it's impossible to say. I mean, we have unconfirmed reports. The footage that's coming on the Telegram channels showing smoke around the Kremlin. So I think there was an attack. Typically, Kiev, Bankova, the president's administration, doesn't comment on these kind of attacks. When there was a huge bomb on the Kerch bridge that didn't destroy it, but did a lot of damage. Again, Kiev didn't comment on that. There was another bomb that went off in Crimea in an airfield and destroyed several planes and set off an ammunition dump. And again, there was no comment from Bankova. So they tend to be very quiet about this. And I don't think we'll see any kind of comment or confirmation coming from the Kremlin side. There is a possibility that it's partisan action, that the drones, as I say, I mean, Ukraine border is a long way away at the edge of what drones can fly. So it's possible that these drones were smuggled into Russia and launched closer to Moscow.
Okay.
That could have been a special ops operation by the Ukrainians, or it could have been, you know, there's a small group of Russians who are fighting against the Kremlin who have been carrying out small acts of terror and blowing up city government buildings and police stations in Russia. So I think it's going to remain unclear. But as for assassination attempt, I mean, the Kremlin territory is huge and it's never clear where Putin is, and he tends to be inside. The chances of killing Putin with a drone attack on the Kremlin building is very, very low. And the Russians have already said that he wasn't actually in the Kremlin at the time.
Right.
He spends a lot of time at his residence. But the PR victory from this is enormous for the Ukrainians. I mean, to strike to the heart of Russia, to Moscow, to hit the Kremlin itself with a drone.
Can I just request you to just hold on to that thought? I'm going to come back to exactly that. What does this mean to the Ukrainian sides? The entire, you're saying the PR, but, you know, just their boost as far as their fight against Russia is concerned. But I also want to go across to Svetoslav Yuvrash, who's the Ukrainian MP, joining us. Yuvrash, do you have any more details of what the Ukrainian authorities are saying or what has transpired?
The reality is we're fighting a war against the Russians. In the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, they have done everything possible to destroy our leadership. And I mean, it's too early to give you all the details on the story and the statements and all that, but it's very clear that as far as fighting a war...
So, the big issue here is, of course, that some sort of an attack has taken place because there is a visual to suggest that. Exactly who is behind that attack will have to be established more. And what was the intention of that attack also will have to be established. But Yuvrash, if you can still hear me, the allegation coming in from the Kremlin is that this was a bid to assassinate President Putin. I think we've lost him. But that's going to be, Ben, is that going to be something difficult to prove and establish? That this was a bid to kill Putin?
In most general terms, they flew a drone, someone flew a drone against the Kremlin, and that's where Putin works. He sits in that historic building on the river. And in that sense, yes, it is an assassination attempt. As to whether it was going to be effective, like I said, I think it's almost impossible to target Putin personally and actually effectively kill him. So in the general sense, yes, it was an attack on the Kremlin. It was an assassination attempt, but with very little chance of actually working. And I think that's what we've seen. I mean, like I said before, I think the real value of this and the point of doing this is for the PR value in this war, which is Ukraine is desperately trying to keep the story in the headlines because it needs the West's aid. It's afraid of fatigue, that people get tired of this. And you have this spectacular picture of smoke rising over the Kremlin with a hole in the wall because it got hit with the drone is going to be a top story. I mean, it is a top story. Here we are doing it. And that is very important for continuing the war, for continuing supplies to Kiev, for keeping the support on their side. And the Russians are going to react because here's a hit to the heart of Russia. And that's very uncomfortable for them because life in Moscow itself, talking to our correspondents there, is actually extremely normal. Everyone's going about their business, shopping, going to bars are full, the nightclubs are full. And to actually bring the war to Russia's heartland is going to have a psychological shock. for the Russians themselves. And that could potentially cause Putin problems because he's managed to shield his own people, the bulk of the population, from the war. And they haven't participated. There's no sense of war in Moscow.
And Ben,
And
interestingly, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think from the Ukrainian voices that we've managed to get so far, they're very clear about this, that, they are fighting a war against Russia. And absolutely everything is on the table. And they are going to try and mount more of these attacks into the heart of Russia because that's how they feel that they need to defend their country. It's not just going to be in Ukraine. They want to bring the war to Russia. You see more of this happening in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're anticipating a spring counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side. And there was someone in the State Department who was saying, this is the most effective way of doing negotiations is to do it from a position of strength where the Kremlin's on its back foot. And at the moment, the Kremlin is not on its back foot. I mean, the war is ground down to a war of attrition where they're just shelling each other. But with some spectacular successes, some pressure on the Kremlin, then it seems to me anyway that there's a growing desire to see an end and negotiated solution. But the strategy very clearly is to hit Russia with a hammer blow in this counteroffensive. I mean, NATO Stoltenberg was saying that 98% of the weapons that are promised are now in Ukraine, including 230 tanks. And I've only seen concrete reports for about 30 tanks. So it could well be that they've been sneaking in a lot of extra arms and ammunition material, tanks, what have you, and that we're anticipating a big attack. And that seems very clearly to include hitting Russia on Russian soil. Because so far the
Ben, just hold your thought. I'm getting a statement by the Russian Presidential Press Service. They have said, and this is important here, I want to bring in my colleagues Anand Narasimhan and Abhishek Jha as well. Abhishek, we are getting this response from the Russian Presidential Press Service. Moscow will be ready to respond to Kyiv's attempt to carry out a drone attack on the Kremlin whenever and wherever it sees fit. So they're already escalating. They're taking this very, very seriously.
Clearly, the kind of news we were hearing for last couple of weeks about this massive offensive that Russia was preparing to launch against Ukraine, there have been some preemptive strikes against Russian assets, and this one takes it to another level when we see that Russian president's house or his residence complex is being attacked by drones, though in the footage it is clear that before the drone could strike the building, it was put down by some arsenal or the firing by the rockets from the aerial defense system of the Russia. But even the fact remains very questionable whether Ukraine has attained that capability of sending a rocket or an loitering ammunition for as far as about 500 miles, because the Moscow to Kyiv aerial distance is about 500 miles, and the last border connect that Ukraine still holds from there to Moscow, it will be about 400 miles. So clearly, this long endurance capability drones with Ukraine is a sign of worry. Should be a sign of worry for Russia. And
no, but Abhishek, interestingly, our Russian guest, the Russian journalist, is suggesting that because the distance is so large, it is quite possible the drones were smuggled into Russia and then launched on the Kremlin. Let me also bring in Anand Narasimhan, who's actually joining us from Goa, the venue of the SCO summit. Anand, once again, it looks like Russia-Ukraine escalations could dominate the SCO, and just the thought process of the global leaders right now.
Well, one also sees, because there is a key one-on-one on the side meeting between the Indian foreign minister and his counterpart, the Russian foreign minister Lavrov, who's expected early Tuesday morning, and that was supposed to be a long conversation. Two big one-on-ones on the sidelines of the SCO is with Russia and with China. Now, is this going to impede or put a question mark on foreign minister Lavrov's coming? We'll have to see, or whether that visit will be on schedule, because Russia has so far said that they treat this as an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin, and they said that they will choose the time and place to respond because they're directly blaming the Ukrainians.
Yes.
The Ukrainians so far are being sheepish and they're saying this could be Russian propaganda. But interestingly, like you said, from Kharkiv to Moscow itself is a 700-kilometer distance. So clearly somebody has sent these kamikaze drones from inside Russian territory towards the Kremlin. There are two drones we are given to understand. Some visuals say that there has been some damage to the Kremlin Kremlin structure. Although President Putin was not present inside Kremlin at that point in time, he was not there. So, but the Russians they're not going to take this lying down. If you're going to send a drone into Kremlin, Russia is going to come back. And does that mean that this conflict is going to get escalated? What does that mean? Is there going to be some punitive big strike that Russia would give as a counter response? We'd have to see. But more importantly, when will Russia now send the Foreign Minister Lavrov to Goa for the SCO? That becomes another big question. We're waiting for some confirmation on that, and we are hopeful that that visit remains as scheduled. But what it does is this does throw, like you said, a new dimension to the conversation point and the focus point here. And the eyes will be on China and Russia come the 4th and 5th of May, because the moment the foreign minister lands in India, the first question is going to be on the Kremlin attack and what is going to be Russia's response and what's going to happen to this conflict with Ukraine. Right. Is there any semblance of peace or possibility of peace now, or is it now like an aar-paar ki ladai? That's what it becomes. What happens with China wanting to play the big global peacemaker with trying to negotiate and broker peace, and Xi Jinping even calling Volodymyr Zelensky? Now, will all of that get derailed? That's also another aspect to look at.
I'll come back to you in just a bit, Anand. Sviatoslav Yuvraj, who's the Ukrainian MP, is joining us back. Unfortunately, I think there's still some trouble with his link. Not sure if he can hear me. Yuvraj, you can hear me?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of calls.
Tell us more. What more are you learning? Because Russia's first response is that this is a bid to assassinate President Putin. Whether this attack came close or not is irrelevant. The intention is to attack the Kremlin, and by virtue of that, it's an assassination bid against Putin, and that they will respond at a time and place of their choosing. Yuvraj.
First, Russia is claiming many things all the time, and they are lying about many things all the time. So to me, to take their statements in that fashion is quite an impossibility. There are many actors within Russia who have plenty of motivation to try and attack Kremlin as well. It's very hard exactly to pin down the facts at the moment, but I mean, the fact of the matter is this is a clear symbol of the conflict within Russia. And the fact that, again, we are fighting a war with Russia. They, in the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, tried to kill our president and our leadership time and time again. So the fact of the matter is, I mean, it's not surprising that when you start a war that is the largest war in Europe, the Second World War, you have consequences like this. Which actors have actually done this is very unclear. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, this is the consequence of starting the largest war in Europe.
Okay, so you're saying this is part of a war, and then there are obviously no limits to where Ukraine will also look to hit back. But I do want to ask you, Yuvraj, this is going to be an escalation point, right? The Russian-Ukraine war have seen...
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's very unclear about the facts at the moment. It's very hard.
Fair enough. It is unclear what the facts at the moment are, but we are quoting each side. What I want to understand, though, is that with what Russia is saying this attack is and what they plan to do, there will be possibly an escalation in this conflict. Isn't that something that the Ukrainian establishment would be aware of?
I mean, the Russians are killing, murdering, destroying en masse every single day. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's not exactly the escalation that is... There is a full-scale war happening right now, with thousands dying almost daily and millions displaced. So I don't understand the point about escalation. It's as escalated as can be at the moment. So it's not exactly a point of fear of that sort. I mean, we're fighting a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm talking to you the place where Russia was supposed to be in a week, and we beat them back from here. We showed to the world the ludicrous nature of their claims about history, about Ukraine, and about their power. So we're happy to do that again, as much as Russia wants.
Can I ask you, how confident are you in Ukraine and Ukraine authorities and defenses feeling of this fight back that you're giving?
We have shown that we can beat the Russians. We beat them around our capital. We beat them in the north of the country. We beat them in the east of the country. We beat them in the south of the country. So, I mean, the point here is that we'll continue beating the Russians until they leave us alone, because we are fighting on one thing and one thing only, that is a right for Ukrainians to choose what the future of Ukraine is. The Russians are making very imperialistic claims about our country, that we should be a part of their country, which they should take us over. We don't agree with that. We think the nations should decide what their future is. And our nation has decided right now to fight back in whatever the Russians are claiming doing against our country.
Okay, just stay with me, Yuvraj. I want to quickly bring in Ben also, who's a journalist from Russia. Ben, you heard what Yuvraj said. You know, there is no escalation anymore. This is as deep as it gets as far as this war is concerned. What are your thoughts on that? When Russia claims that they're going to hit back or respond to what this alleged assassination bid is, what does that mean?
Me, I mean, my Ukrainian colleague, absolutely right. This is a full-blown war. There is no escalation. Everyone's fighting as hard as they can with everything they've got. In terms of, but I think Peskov, the presidential spokesman's statement that you read, is rather ominous. I mean, one thing that's been noticed about the war is that the Russians haven't attacked Kiev. Well, they have attacked Kiev, but the bombing as such was in the suburbs, and there was rockets have been fired at the city. But they haven't targeted Bankova. Bankova is a street right in the heart next to Maidan, where the president sits. And so we might see them use some of the hypersonic accurate missiles, the ones they've got left, and actually target the president's administration, the building, the equivalent of the Kremlin in Kiev, and or start bombing Kiev with the strategic bombers they have. They have these very sophisticated planes that can fly very high above the defenses and actually bomb the capital. And we actually haven't seen, you know, a systematic attack on the capital. So in terms of escalation, I think that would be the escalation. I mean, that would be the obvious target the Kremlin would go for, is to start hitting historic Kiev, which they've tried to avoid so far. In large parts, other than lobbing missiles at the city from time to time.
Yuvraj,
and that would be significant. I think even the Russians would find that uncomfortable, because, you know, it's a 2,000-year-old city. It's beautiful. Everybody knows it. It's a World Heritage Site. And to actually start bombing the capital itself, rather than the suburbs, which people are not so emotionally attached to, would be another great crime by the Russians to do such a thing, unforgivable. To start smashing up historic Kiev. But that is, I think, the obvious response here is you hit our Kremlin, we're going to hit yours.
Yeah. Yuvraj, please just stay with us. Ben Aris too. I've just got an update, and this is coming from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who's saying that Ukrainian troops will soon begin their offensive. He's accusing Russia of escalation. Let me go across to my colleagues Abhishek and Anand also on this. Abhishek, tell us more of what is the first word coming in from Zelensky. Is Zelensky suggesting that Russia is using some sort of a false flag attack to escalate the matters against Ukraine?
So clearly, this was expected online, because this is the false. Whether this was a false flag attempt or it was just information war, or whether it was actually happened will remain a mystery. But we know that the Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky is in Finland right now. He's trying to garner as much support from the neighboring countries and NATO allies. And there he has said this, that there will be escalation in war, and the attempt on the President Putin's life is not going to, you know, get away very easily, because the Russian side has been now clearly very much is strong in his opinion that now Ukraine has attained or achieved all those ammunition necessary to attack directly Moscow. We were talking about the kind of distance that Moscow still had from the Ukrainian center, and that was kind of strength that Russia was hoping that it will never be attacked. But now when Moscow, in the heart of city, the most protected building, or one of the most protected building in Russia, is under the attack from a Ukrainian drone. Clearly, this could play very big in the domestic audience of Russia as well, how they are going to react, how the Russian government is going to calm their tension, whether there will be panic, or how emboldened the Ukrainian side will be that now they have the capability to hit the center of the Moscow and the President Putin himself.
Yes, it could certainly boost Ukrainian confidence and be a booster to their side, more so for Russia. Anand, my colleague, is also joining us. Anand, as you heard some of our experts and also the Ukrainian MP, you know, there is no escalating this. This is already where, at the highest point, it is a do or die fight for both sides, and more so for Ukrainians than for Russia, because their public so far has been shielded from the aftermath of this war. But now it seems that even that could not be not stay as a possibility anymore.
Well, Russia does not need any reason to escalate. Russia is already the one which decided to annex certain parts of Ukraine to shield its own strategic interests because of NATO's increasing presence closer to its doorstep. And it all started with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. So Russia does not need any reason if it wants to. It is somewhere, it is constructing the attack and calibrating the attacks based on the response that's coming in. Volodymyr Zelensky is actually on record today saying that they're going to increase their counteroffensive. In the past, he has said that they have the capability to even strike Moscow now. That's what he had said, hinted. There were other voices from the Ukrainian establishment which came out and said. Now, whether that was propaganda or that's what we are seeing manifest today, we have to wait and watch. Altogether, they have Ukraine has been very careful in calibrating the overall propaganda too. The information propaganda has made only Putin and his closest experts, his generals, the villains of the piece. They have not largely targeted the Russian people. And they have tried to tell the world, along with the Western propaganda machinery, which has been overactive, that the Russian people are not for this war. And it is only Putin's machinations, and it is Putin who's doing it. That's why the attack at the Kremlin. Now, so far, Ukraine has not even taken claimed ownership. They actually are shielding themselves under plausible deniability, saying, how can we even fly drones that distance? So it has to come from within Russian territory. But we have now accessed, courtesy somebody on social media, a very clear picture of the drone actually making its way, and it's trying to enter the Kremlin compound, where it is shot right at the top, shot down by their defense system right on top of the building. There's no structural damage, but you can see the drone explode and then topple there right on the building structure. President Putin was not there at Kremlin. There's no structural damage that's happened, but the Russians are not going to take this kindly. Anybody who tries to attack Russia or gets close to Mother Russia, you saw the response. Even with the NATO nations coming close to even somewhere like Lithuania, Estonia, or even Finland or Poland and talking to Russia, Ukraine made Putin move in and annex Crimea in 2014. This is stepping into Mother Russia, into Moscow itself. This is going to mean that there will be a calibrated response. We can only hope against hope that there won't be an escalation, but we know it's there in the back of the mind of everybody watching this broadcast that there will be some serious escalation in the days to come. What that means, like Ben just said...
We're getting a reaction from President Zelensky. Let's listen in.
And I believe that this year will be decisive for us, for Europe, for Ukraine, decisive for victory. Thank you, Finland. Thanks, everyone who helps us. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll discuss preparation for the next EU sanctions package against Russian aggression, against Russia for this terror, as well as compliance with existing sanctions, which Russia is constantly trying to evade. All of us should remember that the harder...
Abhishek, I want to come to you. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, is also with us. Sir, just give me a few minutes. Abhishek, we heard a reaction, which was a press conference with the Finnish counterpart that Zelensky was part of. As you mentioned earlier, he's in Finland. I'm not sure at this stage if he's been informed of what has happened and what Russia is claiming and what his plans are. But this looked like possibly this was before this attack was made public by Russia. What more are you learning from the Ukrainian side, Abhishek?
So far, this Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, one of the rarest outside his country's visit, he has been visiting Finland. And next week, he's going to visit Germany also. So far, he's been trying to garner as much political support, military support, and also what steps could be taken by the NATO members and the European Union to dampen the Russian economic spirit and damage the Russian economy as well because of the multiple round of sanctions. About 10 to 12 round of sanctions have already been applied on the Russian trade and international commerce, including the capping of the Russian oil in the international market. But that hasn't done any major damage to the Russian economy, and this was kind of accepted by the West. Also, We'll have to see how much of support and what kind of support Zelensky will gather, and whether he's been reacting to the statement with the knowledge of the attack that has happened on the Kremlin, or he was just not aware of the fact, or the bite was previously
let's
done.
just wait and see. But obviously, as far as this Russian claim is concerned, we are yet to see evidence of that. Whether they're going to release some evidence to say that they know for sure this is a Ukrainian mounted attack, we'll have to wait and see. Ashok Sajjanhar, our Russian expert and Ukrainian MP who was joining us earlier, very categorically said that, there is no escalating this. This is already as full-blown a war as there can be. But given that this is now entering the other side of the border, this is getting closer to Moscow, putting not just Russian authorities, but the Russian public in danger. How do you see this as, panning out? Do you believe Ukrainians will get all the support they've been getting so far to take this to Russia?
You made a very important point, Shivani, and I, for one, would like to see some evidence coming out of the Kremlin, coming out of Russia, to take what Russia is saying on face value. Frankly, at this moment, I do not take it on face value, and I'll tell you the reason why. One, of course, what the Ukrainians themselves have said, 700 kilometers flying through Russian territory without being detected, without being noticed, and reaching right up to Kremlin. I think it's sort of, it is beyond imagination that.
But what if this was mounted from inside Russia?
Yeah, exactly. So it is mounted from inside because, we need also to factor in the fact that Mr. Putin has his own enemies within his own country. And so, there could be some of the disgruntled elements. Let me mention another point, which is even more significant and even more important in my view. You see, Ukraine has been given equipment, weaponry by the West only for defensive purposes.
Right.
Even when HIMARS was given to them, it was given to them with a range of 80 kilometers, not with range of 380 kilometers so that it could hit within Russia. It is hitting within Russia has been a big no-no as far as all the support from the United States and NATO is concerned.
Okay.
Now, if Ukraine has violated its commitment, has violated its agreement and gone inside and hit Russia, then you can be certain that it is not going to get the sort of support that it has been getting so far for the last 14 months plus. I'm sure Mr. Zelensky realizes it. So I don't think that, this would be really like shooting himself in the foot, not only as far as the repercussions, the implications in terms of the escalation, as you were talking about from Russia, but also the fact that, after this, whether it is Germany, whether it is France, I'm sure no one will really be willing, as it is, they have been having, some sort of second thoughts, but that they would be willing to support Ukraine in, what President Biden said, as long as it takes. I think there'll be very many question marks because this is really drawing the NATO countries also to a direct confrontation with Russia.
Yeah,
and NATO and the United States has been very clear, Shivani, that they want.
Yeah, but Ashok Sajjanhar, while you're right in what you're saying, there's been a certain no-go area. But if you hear Ukrainian voices, they believe they have the right to go into Russia and into the heart of Russia. And one of their MPs even told us that we want to see Putin dead. So their emotions and their feelings on this are as clear as it gets. And Zelensky's been pretty critical of the West, even the countries supporting him as well, because he feels that they're not doing enough. They need to do more as far as protecting Ukraine is concerned. And I wonder, the Ukrainian president said that we are going to launch our offensive, we will reply to Russia, Russia is behind escalation. I'm wondering if he said all of this before this attack took place or as it was happening, and whether these are tied or not. It's difficult to say at this stage because we've not got a direct response from him. But the timing of the statement he's making with the Finnish president, Benaris, is very crucial. In that statement, he's saying, our troops will start our offensive, we will reply to Russia, and it is Russia that is guilty of escalation. So he has already espoused his, his intention to escalate this fight.
Shivani, you are very right. You make 2 or 3 very important points, and let me sort of, try to respond to them as best as I can. when he's talking about the counteroffensive, it is not only today in Finland that he's talking about the counteroffensive.
Yeah.
He's been talking about the spring counteroffensive for a long time. And, everyone has been waiting as to, when it is going to happen. And the counteroffensive, Shivani, has been that the Ukrainian forces are going to throw out the Russian troops from the areas that they have occupied in Ukraine. They have occupied about 15 to 20% of the Ukrainian territory. You remember that last year in September, October, they had been able to push back the Russian forces in a very significant way in many of the areas, whether it is Kherson, Mariupol, and even down south. So the whole idea has been, and he's been very clear in that, I don't think there's been any doubt about that. He's been very clear that we are going to reoccupy our own land, including Crimea. Of course, people have had question marks as far as that is concerned. The second point that you made about certain elements in Ukraine, meaning just imagine that if there has been this relentless attack on all the cities that have been going on for such a long period, more than 14 months, more than 8 to 9 million people have been displaced. I don't know how many thousands of civilians have been killed. The whole infrastructure has been destroyed. Would you be very surprised if there are voices within Ukraine which say that, we are going to take the fight inside Russia? But
Right.
the plain, simple fact is that they do not have the capacity, and they have, been given, and all these stray voices that are coming out that you are hearing, they do not have the capacity. They do not have the wherewithal.
Okay.
All the wherewithal is with the Ukrainian government, president, establishment, Ministry of Defense, not these people who are outside.
No,
who might
I
be
think they are
venting
some of them are elected representatives, and they are representing the voice of the Ukrainian establishment itself. Anand, whether we like it or not, we can call it escalation or we can't call it escalation. This is as high as it anyways goes. The fundamental reality is that this could change the nature of the offensive from Russia and also the counter-offensive from Ukraine. And the fundamental question now is, how much is the West willing to back Ukraine if they want to take the fight into Russia?
Yeah. Now, here is the thing, Shivani, just take a look at the footage that we are putting on air. And I'd request Ashok Sajanar and everybody else to focus on this. The sky is a night sky. It's 4 p.m. in Russia right now. Delhi is 2.5 hours ahead of Russia. So it's still daylight in Delhi and it's still daylight in Russia. It's not a day sky. It's a night sky. So clearly this has happened in the wee hours between yesterday night and today morning or late in the night yesterday. This footage is now coming out now. That means Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that they're going to increase their offensive and their counter-offensive is going to begin. That statement in Finland happens after this attack in Russia has happened. Whether Zelensky knew about it or not, or is there this clause of plausible deniability, is another aspect to understand. That were there other agents who were contracted, who were paid, who were decided that you infiltrate into Russia, get close to Kremlin and try and do this attack, daring attack, which is targeted at Putin and at the Kremlin, saying that we can get to Kremlin too. So it's a big psyop. It can be a targeted assassination as the Russians are claiming it, or it can be just another aspect of warfare where they are trying to say, we can get to you. There are those, or to try and show to the world that there are those within Russia who want Putin gone or Putin dead.
Okay,
So
Anand, just hold your thought. I think we are getting the first official response as far as this alleged attack to kill President Putin is concerned. Zelensky's press service is saying Ukraine has no information regarding the attack last night against the Kremlin. So there you have it. The Ukrainians, at least officially in their first response, have said that they've got nothing to do with this and that they have no information regarding the attack. How has this attack even been possible, as the Russians claim from Ukrainian side, is one question. Do they have evidence to prove that this was the Ukrainian handiwork is another question. Can they present that evidence? Because that drone was, of course, blown to smithereens. Are they going to be able to establish that and therefore get that upper hand they need to further their offensive against Ukraine? Unclear right now. But certainly Ukraine is also not one to back off. If we've learned anything in the last 14 months, is that Ukrainians are not going to back off from this fight. And now, Ben Aris, as we get that first response from the Ukrainian press, from the Ukrainian president's press, it's clear that there's going to be a lot of denial. This is going to be a realm of speculation. but this will have some sort of decisive change in the way the two countries react from here on. Let me bring in my colleague Abhishek first up as well. Abhishek, the first Ukrainian statement is out.
And clearly, this statement does not talk about whether Ukraine had any role directly in it, in this drone attack that the Kremlin has been claiming that the Ukrainian side has tried to attempt an assassination bid on the life of President Putin's life. But having said that, there are too many questions that needs to be answered from the Russian side as well. Because if somebody has to have an attack on the Russian president's life, it will not be an attempt at 3 a.m. in the night, because the president is most likely not to be there. Also, they know that the aerial defense system of Russia is not so weak that it will not detect and destroy any moving or loitering ammunition on the top of the Kremlin. So this is clearly not a thing that opposition would like to attempt, because it will just go in vain. But at the same time, the messaging is very clear that Russians are not safe even in the middle of the city, even in the middle of their capital city, Moscow. And this is a stronger message that now Russian citizens, Russian civilians in Moscow, which have so far been watching this whole battle in their TV screens, they also need to worry that now the war has reached to their home ground as well, and they will have to react to that.
Yes, and I think Ben Aris, the journalist joining us from Russia, was suggesting earlier that this could create pressure on Putin. So Ben, I have two quick questions for you. How is Putin going to react after this? And secondly, how much support can the West give to Ukraine if they openly are to be attacking Russia inside its land?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of this conversation, I said that Kiev very rarely takes responsibility. It usually doesn't comment at all, and it's just done the same thing again here. So I think you can discount that statement as just not bringing us any further. It's just officially said it wasn't us. As for the, I think the escalation that you're talking about is going to happen, and what we're going to see. I mean, look, I should highlight here, this was an attack by a drone. And the Ukrainians are making their own drones. They have their own drones. It wasn't an attack with an American-made missile, a British-made missile. Though your colleague made the correct point that the West has been very reluctant to allow Ukraine or give it the equipment so that it can strike within Russia. And what just happened was the Ukrainians hit within Russia to Moscow with their own weapons, drones, very unsophisticated. And I think that's the way it's going to go now, that the escalation we're going to see is that Ukrainians themselves, Zelensky has been very frustrated. He's been asking for all sorts of very powerful weapons, up to and including F-16s, and he hasn't got them. And they're trying to win this war. And I think the Bankova, the president's office in Kiev, is saying, right, we're going to escalate ourselves. We're going to take this fight into Russia, because there have been other attacks, again, against airfields. There was a string of attacks against Russian airfields close to the Ukrainian border. And again, those were all drones, and Ukrainian-made drones. And I think this is where it's going to go. As for Moscow's response, like I said, they haven't made much use of their strategic bombers. They've used them selectively on a few occasions. And if Russia were to escalate, if they were to try and punish this assassination attempt, if you want to put it in those terms, then the obvious target would be come and start hitting the capital city with bombs, which would be a horrific escalation, because the civilian casualties there, Kiev is a city of 1.3 million people, and the casualties go from the tens of thousands, to the hundreds of thousands. But we remain to be seen. As I say, I think the counteroffensive the Ukrainians are planning includes attacks into Russia. So I don't think this is going to be the last attack on Moscow.
Yes, but Ben, very quickly, I've got 30 seconds before I slip into a break. Very quickly, I want to understand with you, even if they're doing this on their own and not with West-supplied weapons, how comfortable is the West going to be with this escalation?
Not comfortable at all.
Not comfortable.
I mean, this is the main fear. Stoltenberg, head of NATO, said, like, my first priority is to avoid World War III.
Yes.
My second priority is to help Ukraine and make sure it doesn't lose. And that's why the West has refused. They've given them HIMARS, but they have 80-kilometer range. But there are some HIMARS that the US have that have 300-400-kilometer range with which you could hit Moscow. And they specifically have not supplied Ukraine with that, because of the fear that the defensive weapons so far, the mentality is we're helping to defend Ukraine. If you give them long-range missiles like that, they become offensive. And then the Kremlin could argue that NATO's gone from defending Ukraine to attacking Russia. An attack on Russia is an act of war by NATO, NATO weapons, and then boom, you're in Third World War.
Okay, all
And
right.
that's what everyone's terrified.
Unfortunately, I have to slip into a very short break. But our live coverage on this this incident that has taken place, whether it's Ukrainian mounted or not, we can't say. But an attack on the Kremlin, certainly some visuals say that. We'll slip into a very short break. I request our guests and experts to stay with us. We'll be back with more updates.
कंफर्ट जोन है वो खराब ना हो, जिससे हमने जो टिकट का वो कर रखा है, पेमेंट दे रखा है जिसका 4,500, वो भी हमें वापस नहीं दे रहे ना, वो हमें 7 डेज में देंगे। तो फिर अभी अगर वो देते तो समझ में आता, हम कर भी लेते, बट अभी तो वो भी नहीं दे रहे, वो भी 7 डेज में देंगे और जो डिफरेंस अमाउंट है वो भी 7 डेज में देंगे, तो कोई कैसे जाएगा।
बहुत गलत, बहुत बुरी है, ना रिस्पांस बरोबर है, ना बात कर रहे हैं बरोबर उन लोग, ना कोई काउंटर में बरोबर रिस्पांस है उसका, और ना ही कोई पेमेंट का ऐसे बोल रहे हैं क्यों ना।
My colleague Ridhima Bhatnagar is joining us with more. Very good morning to you, Ridhima. Ridhima, before the rest took them to the NCLT, the CEO has confirmed that they filed for insolvency proceedings. But perhaps an arbitration could have bailed them out of this mess. How do you think this is likely to play out?
Morning, Shilpa. As you rightly pointed out, there are many questions now as to what could have been an easier step to try and get out of this mess, because as of now, no easier way of putting it. It's a complete mess for passengers who are stranded and for the future of the airline as well. Let's just give a sequence of events to our viewers to help them understand what really has happened. Now, yesterday you had the airline informing that they will not be operating for the 3rd and 4th of May, that is 48 hours. They blamed this on Pratt & Whitney, saying because of faulty engines which have been given by Pratt & Whitney, this has resulted in grounding of 50% of their fleet. But what really stumped the industry, Shilpa, was when they announced that they are also filing for voluntary insolvency, which essentially means bankruptcy, which now means there is a question mark as far as the future of the airline is concerned. Now remember, the airline requires about 103 engines by Pratt & Whitney, and they have about only half of them, which means 50% of the fleet is grounded. Now the airline is saying that because of this grounding, they've had to pay revenue loss of almost 10,800 crores. But as we pointed out, this has now resulted into a legal battle between Pratt & Whitney and Go First as well. If you look at the statement that's coming from Pratt & Whitney, they in fact have put the blame back on the airline. What the legal saga will look like, that's one part of the story. What we're also now understanding, we heard from some passengers, they are stranded. While the airline has said that they will be giving refunds, there is no clear timeline. The other aspect that I'm also picking up by means of sources is that a lot of cabin crew and people who are working with the airline are also stranded. When this announcement of bankruptcy came, many of them were between their week offs or on layovers. They, in fact, have also now been stranded, some within the country, some overseas. They've been trying to contact the airline, but no response has come. Now, remember, Go First now becomes the first airline after Jet and Kingfisher that is filed for bankruptcy.
Ridhima, how is this expected to impact the flyers? Of course, it's been said that no flights for the next 3 days. But, considering they filed for bankruptcy, I don't think there's going to be any relief for the airline or for flyers after that as well.
Just a small correction, Shilpa, they've actually announced cancellation of operations only for 2 days. But technically, because they've filed for bankruptcy, we do know that it's almost unlikely that the operations will be back. But as per the official announcement, they've said that they will not be operating flights for the 3rd and 4th of May. What is also interesting is the official statement by Go Air is saying that there are technical operations. They're not saying that they don't have any future plan as far as the operation of the airline is concerned. But as you rightly pointed out, this is going to be a mess for the passengers. It is highly problematic because an airline like Go First actually does not have an arrangement of alternatives with other airlines. So when they cancel a ticket for the passenger, they actually are not rebooking them on another airline. They're saying refunds will come, but we don't know when those refunds will come. So essentially, if you were a passenger who was supposed to fly on Go First between the 3rd and the 4th of May, you're now stranded. You will have to shell out a lot more till the time your refund actually comes back.
Ridhima, also, what's the word coming in from the government, the aviation ministry?
We had a reaction that came in from the civil aviation minister yesterday, who called it
Welcome back. We're tracking the latest after Russia made allegations that Ukraine mounted an assassination bid against President Putin. Now, advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine, Zelensky, is saying regarding drones over the Kremlin, he says everything is predictable. Russia is clearly preparing a large-scale terrorist act. Therefore, they initially detained a large group of alleged saboteurs in Crimea and then demonstrated drones over the Kremlin. So they're saying this could be a false flag attack to pin it on Ukraine. This is the advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine. In fact, he also goes on to say Ukraine conducts an exclusively defensive war and does not attack objects on the territory of Russian Federation. Why? It does not solve any military problem, but it gives the Russian Federation grounds to justify its attacks on civilians. Also adding, we are watching with interest the growth of incidents and excesses taking place in various parts of the Russian Federation. The appearance of unknown drones at energy facilities or on the territory of the Kremlin can only indicate the underground work of local resistance forces. So very interesting comments coming in. I also have a comment from the leader of Russia's Wagner group, who is suggesting that I believe Ukraine's counter-offensive has already started. So this clearly is a mention to the statement Zelensky gave only a short while ago in Finland. But on the advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine's statement, basically saying that Russia is propping this attack up and pinning it on Ukraine so that they can justify their offensives against it. Let me go across to my colleague Siddhant, who's joining us with more. So Siddhant, this is a very important key statement coming in within hours of the Russian allegation.
Well, that's right, Shivani, absolutely. And in fact, this is perhaps for the first time that Kyiv has cleared its position on this entire allegation which has been made by Russians. Now, there are some crucial takeaways from the statement that has come from the office of the advisor to the head of the president of Ukraine, and they allege that the large group of people were allegedly detained by Russia, and this was done to demonstrate drone over Kremlin. Now, Ukraine has alleged that it could be Russia behind it, because they want to justify their terrorist act, and it also gives grounds to justify the attacks on civilians. Secondly, Ukraine also says that they are watching the growth of incidents and excesses taking place in various parts of the Russian Federation. The appearance of unknown drones at energy facilities or on the territory of the Kremlin can only indicate the underground work or local resistance forces. So Ukraine has alleged that it could be a work of some of the groups being supported by Russian Federation, or it could be a work of some insiders. They have completely distanced themselves from this, and they also say that this would give grounds to Russia to justify the special military operation.
More attacks Ukraine. And offensive against the civilians of Ukraine. Interestingly, at the end of the statement, it also says drones can be bought at any military dealer. Because the loss of power control over the country by the Putin clan is obvious, Russia is constantly talking about its total control over the air. And in short, something is happening in the Russian Federation, but definitely without Ukrainian drones over the Kremlin. So both sides, you listen to Russian sources, you listen to Ukrainian forces, two very divergent views coming in. Russian sources saying this is clear indication that Ukrainians wanted to escalate. The president made a statement in Finland that our offensive will just start. And here you have Ukrainian sources saying this is clearly false flag being pinned on Ukraine to justify more terror attacks on Ukraine. I'm also joined by another guest joining us. Harsh V. Pant is a professor of international relations, King's College London, vice president for studies at ORF Foundation, and Ben Harris continues to be with us. Harsh V. Pant, can I first take your view on how you look at these allegations of an assassination bid and what this could do to the conflict?
Well, I think certainly we seem to be moving to another stage, an escalatory stage in this conflict. We knew for a while that both sides are preparing for a battlefield offensive. In this, I think the Russians have taken a lead in shaping the narrative. After all, it's also a battle of the narrative. So,
Yes.
and Russia has been losing that narrative for a while because the sympathy largely has been with the Ukrainians because they seem to be fighting a defensive war against the aggression of Russia. So I think by escalating it or by demonstrating that it is escalating to a level where Putin himself is being targeted via assassination, this is certainly an attempt to change the nature of this conversation, to change the nature of how this war is perceived by the rest of the world, and clearly anticipating that a counteroffensive from Ukrainians is around the corner. And as you were mentioning earlier, suggesting that it has already begun. And this is perhaps the first strike in that counteroffensive from the Russian side, interestingly, because I think they would certainly like to shape the perception field before any ground conflict starts.
Right. On the other hand, I think Ukraine is also doing the same. They're suggesting that Russia is planning something big, which is why they have conducted this false flag attack. I am also joined by Anna Tanjan on the Chinese perspective, but let me first quickly take our viewers through some breaking updates we are getting. As far as the SCO meeting in India is concerned, Russian embassy sources are telling CNN News 18 that there is no change in the plan of the Russian foreign minister regarding his India visit for the SCO foreign ministers meet. That's the latest we're getting. Of course, that meeting, that visit by the Russian foreign minister becomes of very key importance and timing right now in India. Let me also go across to Aina Tanjan. How do you see this conflict now escalating? Is the fight going to be within Russia too now? Is Ukraine capable of that? And what could this do to the entire world?
Well, up to this point, if in fact they did launch this attack, Ukraine has been very careful about attacking the main part of Russia, not the parts claimed in Crimea and Donbass, obviously. But if this was an attack by them, then it gives Russia an excuse to escalate. It could very well be a false flag operation as well. Putin wants to go to the next level. There's been a lot of casualties, very little movement on the peace front. And at this juncture, because of the deadlock and money being an issue, as well as popular support, this might very well be. There's such a tremendous amount of disinformation going on all sides. It's sometimes very hard to pick out the truth.
Aina, how would the Chinese be looking at this?
China will not be happy. They have been proposing peace plans. Just last week, Xi called Zelensky. He was hopeful that this was going to result in something. Obviously, it is not. While whether it's true or not, Russia will use this as a reason to escalate, and this is going to put peace further behind. China does not believe that a military victory is going to solve this issue. Russia's too big, and it's just, even if Ukraine took that area, there would be very, very hard feelings by the local, mostly Russian side. It would be very hard for them to hold it. This is just an impossible situation which needs to be dealt with at the negotiating table, not with bullets and guns.
And that's the problem we've been facing, isn't it, Ben? Time for some final comments. There seems to be no end to this war. It's only getting bigger and bigger. More and more countries are getting trapped, if not directly, then indirectly. This is threatening to now, take over all of world politics. But there is no end in sight. That's the problem.
No, the problem it's escalating slowly. I mean, if you remember in the beginning, everyone held back, and there was a whole debate about whether the Americans were going to let the Ukrainians use Javelin missiles. And then we've built up now to the point where we're sending 400 Leopard 2 tanks, the most sophisticated tanks in the world, or at least in Europe. I just looked up I should remind everyone, this is actually the second significant drone strike against Russia. In March, we reported there was a wave of drones that flew into Russia, and one came down in a town called Gestapo, just about 100 kilometers outside Moscow. And that was a small Ukrainian-built model that had a range of up to 800 kilometers. So the capability has been there, and the possibility to fly them from the Ukrainian border all the way into Moscow has been there. And we've just seen them actually use that capability successfully, in so much as it actually hit a building in Moscow. And I think going forward, I think this is going to be the escalation we're going to see on the Ukrainian side. Their counteroffensive could include a wave of regular drone attacks against Russian cities within that 800-kilometer radius that they have. And that will enrage the Russians, who I don't know where they can go from this. I mean, the bombers, as I said, I think is the only thing they haven't used a lot of that they could use now.
Harsh, I want to come to you as well. Russia is too big to fail. Ukraine has too much support and the West is not going to allow it to fall. So what happens? Can there be a solution to this conflict?
I think in conflicts like this or in any war, negotiations only happen when the battlefield realities flip one way or another. And I don't think we have seen any movement on the battlefront, with both sides expecting to change that in the near term. And I think that that optimism perhaps falls, but optimism on the battlefield, that with Ukraine feeling that they now have enough reserves to launch this counteroffensive, and with Russians believing, as you say, that they are too big to fail or that they can hold on to the ground. I think this is a classic case where both sides are at a stalemate, which is not leading to any negotiating effort. And as we were discussing, there have been some pointers in that regard, but we have not seen any attempt by external players to bring the two sides together as well. So both Western countries are continuing to support Ukraine, and countries like China continuing to present plans which have very little likelihood of coming to fruition anytime soon.
No, but could the West's view change? Could they now feel that, this has just gone on for too long and it is threatening to become much bigger and we've got to get to the negotiating table? Could it happen?
I think it can happen. I think we have seen some of that view being expressed, for example, during Emmanuel Macron's visit to Europe. But I don't think there is, again, a broad enough consensus in that regard, because you have Eastern Europeans also in Europe who are driving this conversation. And they are leading this conversation at the moment, and they are relatively more aware of the risks that Russia poses to them if Ukraine continues to be in this position. So I think that vision both within Europe and within the transatlantic alliance, I think, is part of the problem as well.
All right, we don't really know exactly what happens from here on, but is this now really looking like a World War III? Is the big question on those who are not on either sides, especially for, let's say, Indians concerned in this war, as we've been witnessing. That's all from me, but updates on this conflict and the latest allegation coming in from Russia continue.
You're watching News Epicenter with me, Maria Shakil. Our top focus is the big claim coming in from the Putin regime, which alleges that Kremlin was targeted by a Ukrainian drone in a bid to assassinate Vladimir Putin. The Russian government has released visuals of the alleged drone strike on the Kremlin, claiming Ukrainian forces have hatched an assassination plot to execute the Russian president. Remember, this comes ahead of Ukraine's counter-offensive in a bid to reclaim territories under Russian control, as the Russian war machine faces logistical issues, including shortage of food, arms, medicines, and of course, the morale is also low. Putin is also facing pressure in Moscow, as the war has dragged on for over 400 days, and the West continues to supply arm and ammunition to the Ukrainian forces. So far, there has been no reaction from the Ukrainian government, and any third-party attempt for a ceasefire has failed. But how should we see this latest claim from Russia? Is Putin settling the stage for an all-out offensive against Ukraine to end the war once and for all? And I'm going to go straight to London, where Sanjay Suri is joining me live. Sanjay, who in Moscow is making this allegation?
Well, this Moscow allegation seems to have come from Dmitry Peskov. He is the Kremlin spokesperson. He's been the spokesperson for a long time now. And he has been the one who has made this statement but we have no independent verification of this at all. We do know that the claims from Kremlin are not always very credible. There is no evidence presented of any damage. There is a claim that there were 2 Ukrainian drones that were intercepted electronically and neutralized. There is no evidence presented where they were shot down, how they were neutralized, and over what place. Now, without this kind of a detail to substantiate the allegations, these allegations do need to be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt, shovels of salt really. And if the Ukrainian side claims, as they do, that this is a justification being made for renewed attacks on Ukrainian targets, that again is something that we need to question, because certainly Russia does not need excuses. For a year and more it has been attacking civilian targets in Ukraine day in, day out, and it's killed tens of thousands of people. It does not need an excuse to justify that it will now launch another attack. So it seems to be, if going by the statements from both sides so far, Ukraine is suggesting that there are local subversives at work, which does mean that either there are people who are disaffected with the Russian state, or it could have been those that Ukraine has placed there, perhaps indirectly. In a war, this kind of thing can only be expected. We do really not know for sure yet who is behind this, but as of now, not the claim